All right, hi everyone. Welcome to Neither Here Nor There Conversations Across. My name is Danny.
Hi everyone, and my name is Christina. Today we have someone very special joining us. She's one of my good friends. She's calling in from New York, and she's definitely one of the most global people or person I know. She has lived all over the world, so I can't wait for everyone to get to know her.
All right, let's fire it away and let's ask Astrid where she's from.
Hi Astrid, thank you so much for joining us from all across the world. I have told Danny that you're one of the most interesting person that I've ever met, being a fellow global citizen. So we'd love to get to, for you to tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, of course. And hi, it's wonderful to be chatting with the two of you. And thank you for the very flattering description. I don't know if I would say I'm one of the most interesting people in the world, but sure. I grew up moving around. I was born in New York, first U.S. citizen in the family. Um, from like my mother's Belgian, my father is Zimbabwean. They met in the UK, and then moved around for my dad's job, but had their first child in Hong Kong, the second in London, and then the third in New York. Um, Briefly after being born, I think I was less than a year old, we moved back to the UK. A few years later, back to New York. A few years later, back to the UK, then to Hong Kong, then back to London, and all the while in the French education system. So there was many different there were many different cultures that were present in my upbringing. And then from I guess at 18, I went to undergrad in the US, decided to go to a small liberal arts college in rural Vermont because I thought it would be very different to central London, where I'd spent a lot of my formative years. And in Vermont, I decided, which I had a wonderful experience, but decided I never wanted to be cold again and applied to the Peace Corps and specifically asked for sub-Saharan Africa. And I was sent to Madagascar. So I was there for a little more than 2 years. And from there, during that time, I decided that I wanted to go more into the private sector. That's another story. And ended up in a tech startup in San Francisco, knowing that I wanted to get already an MBA. And so during that time in SF was applying for MBAs and notably saw that UPenn had a dual MBA and Master's in International Studies, which was very much of interest because I wanted to keep my options open for the entire world. So moved to Philadelphia, was there for a few years, met the delightful Christina there. And then um, during that time, I also met the person who became my husband, who desperately wanted to be in New York post MBA, even though I think I had decided I did my internship in Switzerland. I was ready to move back to Europe, but love makes you do
Oh, crazy things.
crazy things that you didn't necessarily think you wanted to do. And so I've been in New York for the past 4.5 years now.
Wow.
That is a history. That's a very long background history. Are you the same age as us?
Yeah.
Oh my days.
She's all over, and also I forgot to mention Astrid, but Danny actually grew up in Hong Kong, so you
I
guys have
did.
that in common.
Oh,
Yeah, I did.
very
I
nice.
forgot that you also had spent some time in Hong Kong. And I have so many questions. I know that you guys were speaking French as well.
Or
I mean, not
Spanish.
Spanish. You were speaking Spanish before we started. Where does the Spanish come from?
So I think many different things. To begin with, in the French education system, at around 13, you are asked to learn a third language. And I personally wanted to study German, but my parents said it wouldn't be useful, so they pushed me to Spanish. Uh, which then I think it's all relative. It depends what you do. I could be living in Germany right
Exactly.
now. And but no, but I became really interested in Latin America through like learning Spanish. Did some volunteerism there in like Peru. And see, I appreciate Peru too. Peru and Costa Rica. And then in undergrad, just it wasn't planned, but I became a Spanish major because I just kept taking Spanish classes and was really interested in the region and studied abroad in Bolivia. Did like independent study project there, wrote my thesis in Spanish. So there was that. So that was my base. Then I didn't speak it for about 5 years, and almost you just if you don't use a language, you become rusty. And then in the interim, I'd learned a new language because of Peace Corps. So I learned Malagasy when I was in Madagascar. So it was very rusty. But then I met a boy who was Argentinian, and like a lot of the Latinos in Penn really love to stick together and just speak Spanish to each other. So I discovered that if I wanted to like get an in, I needed to brush up my Spanish.
It sure
And
helps to have a Latin boyfriend too.
Sorry?
It sure helps to have a Spanish-speaking boyfriend as well. Is that how you guys met?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we met in grad school. But actually, yeah, to be fair, we met at a French club.
Yes, they met at a French club event because even though your husband is Spanish speaking, he also spent time in Europe learning, which allowed him to learn the language, right?
Yes, so he spent about like 8 years in Switzerland, and I think it's something like even though French hasn't been a primary part of like my like adult life outside of like family, but professionally or academically, um, it's still very important to me. It's my mother tongue. It's what I was raised in, and so it's something I like to stay close to. And so it was very interesting when there was this person who I knew as Argentinian was suddenly at the French club speaking French. I was like, oh, it attracted my interest.
It piqued your interest.
Yeah, for sure.
And since then, I'd say we spent a decent amount of time in Argentina, as well as a lot of his friends in New York are Argentinian, Peruvian, and Spanish, and they all speak Spanish to each other. So Spanish is now my second language. So, so yes, because it's very present in my life.
So you said that English and French were your main languages growing up. So French first is your mother
Yeah.
tongue, followed by English. Were there any others that I don't know about?
No, I mean, so we would speak French with my mother, English with my father, and then school was predominantly in French, with the exception of English class. Uh, but by the nature of the locations that we were in, a lot of the other students as well were bilingual. So it was always a blend. And I can tell you, actually, it was one thing when we graduated, graduated high school. I know it was a fear for a lot of my friends and I that we would suddenly be going to either like English universities or French universities or American, and that we would have to only speak in one language, which we had always been like speaking franglais. So it's just like you're switching between, like in the same sentence, you're just constantly switching. And the realization that that we couldn't actually speak one language fluently. It's like we speak this hybrid thing, and now we have to go talk to other people who won't understand us.
That's kind of how I grew up with my family as well. Actually, speaking like swapping between languages, like I'll like start speaking like I want to eat grapes, but then I'll be like I want to eat putao, and it becomes a little bit confusing for people when I have to stick. Well, for me actually, when I have to stick to one language, that becomes a bit difficult. I get a bit of a crutch from Christina because she speaks both languages, which is nice.
There we go. It's very practical.
Yeah. So I have a question about because your dad's Zimbabwean. He grew up in Zimbabwe, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm guessing he has an accent. He has a Zimbabwean accent. Yes?
So for me, it was always a neutral accent, but I'm told by others that he has an accent.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Well, I mean, compared to like, okay, British, like a British accent or an American accent or Australian, so those three.
Yes. So it's different to all of those. Yeah.
Definitely different. I mean, I'm guessing I've only met like two Zimbabweans in my entire life, and the accent, I guess, the only thing that would be similar would be South African that I would know because I grew up with some South Africans.
I almost think it's like a blend between, because it's almost like a more English version of South African.
So the reason why I ask is because my accent, I grew up in British schooling, and there's no reason why my accent should be American, but it is. And the only American influence in my life was my dad. So I'm wondering, like, because you didn't grow up in Zimbabwe, but you grew up in England and America back and forth. And I'm wondering the influence of maybe his accent, because I do hear like random words from you that might be a little bit different, but that also is like might be a little bit British. So like your accent's very international. It's very like all over the place. And I like want to ask you a little bit more about your accent. Do your siblings have a similar
Do
accent
they
to
sound
you?
like you?
Are you the youngest, the middle, the oldest?
So I'm the youngest. Do they have? I mean, honestly, I'm not 100% sure. As that, like the people who you've always known, it's just almost don't seem like they have a strong accent. It's just like a base of what a language should be. Even though I recognize that that's not the case, and I know that at least I know, I'm aware of the fact that my accent is a bit of a hodgepodge. I don't know if you've had this experience, but I also feel like my accent will change slightly, not a huge, but based off of my surrounding. So in so it's almost like well, I think it's almost like a survival instinct of you want to blend in and be like less noticeably different to others. So in New York, I think it gets more American versus when I go back to the UK and see friends. I know like the last time I was there, a friend commented, he was like, "Oh, it's amazing! Like you left more than 10 years ago and you still have an English accent." And I was like, "Well, it's because that's what I'm hearing. Like you guys are all speaking with an English accent, so I'm just like reverting back." And similarly, if if any like when it's like at home with like whether it be with my dad or even if like when we haven't spent a huge amount of time in Zimbabwe because of the politics, but we spent more time like we went many times growing up to South Africa, and that's another accent where it's like it's familiar. So it's like your mouth almost knows like how to like form into like that local accent. It moves around. Although it's funny, I feel like a lot of people get confused by my accent and then they're like, "Oh, where are you from?" And I'll often just cheat and be like, "Oh, I'm from Belgium." And they're like, "Oh, that's it. It must be a Belgian accent." And I'm
That's
like,
actually one of the
"No."
questions because there's so much. What would you like? Yeah, but why Belgium and not like or like I guess do you choose? Is there a reason why you feel stronger about one than another?
So sometimes when people ask me like where are you from, I said like I'll cheat and just say Belgium because I'm like it's simpler and this way I don't have to like spend a few minutes explaining.
Fair.
I think I like to go to Belgium because it's a neutral country.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
It explains why I speak French. So then there's that. I have the passport. And like if I say American, the thing is neither of my parents were like they now got a few years ago they got the nationality. But I wasn't raised by Americans or like around a lot of Americans, so it's not necessarily something I relate to the most. So I don't want to put that. And Zimbabwean wouldn't be fair in that like I don't have a passport. I haven't lived there. It's like, do I have a connection to the place? Yes, but it's like I don't know it sufficiently well. It's the like versus someone who's actually born and raised. Yeah, people will start asking questions, and then you're like, "Oh no."
That's it though. It's because they start asking questions, and so the best one to cut it off and be like, "No, that's what I do," but I go American, and that becomes an easy answer for me. Then I just go straight American. I also change my accent, and I think you do too, but you it's more lingo.
I do change so much actually. And now that I'm talking to Astrid, I do sound more American because a couple of weeks ago, Astrid, I had some friends visiting from Southeast Asia and my English became so Southeast Asian that I was like, this is so funny. I'm not even from there. Danny
I look
was,
forward to hearing it one day.
it sounded different, no?
Yeah, it's an adaptability thing, and I love that you said that because that's something that I do too. Depending on where I am and who I'm talking to, my vocabulary changes and the intonation of my voice changes and just like mannerisms, all that kind of stuff. But language is one of them, and accent is also one of them. And I was talking to Christina, telling Christina recently a lot of the reasons why sometimes when I'm drunk, my accent gets a little bit more British. And I've been figuring out why, and it's been a fun thing. So accent's been a good thing on my mind recently.
I think this is a good segue, Astrid, to talk about a little bit, because you have so many different cultures and also experiences from all over the world. How do you think all these experiences and perspectives perhaps have impacted your way of thought and the way you view the world?
I'd like to think, I mean, this is my perspective, you can tell me, that it's made me more open-minded and I guess like non-judgmental. To give you an example, so when I moved, after like moving to Madagascar, I think a lot of people ask me and they're like, oh, how was it? Was it everything you expected? And my response was like, I didn't have an expectation because having moved a decent amount and it's just like nothing is ever how you expect it to be. So it almost is like has set my baseline as like there isn't a norm. It's like we're gonna go and we're gonna see what it is. I mean that's how I operate, and I think that it works well for me, but it also is like I'd say it's made me a very curious person as well, that it's almost like an insatiable curiosity that it's never enough. Like I always want to see more. Like I always want to go, whether it be to a new place or even go revisit a place, because if you've been once, that doesn't mean that you've learned everything about it. And not having one core culture leaves you makes me very interested in knowing as much as possible about all of them, because it's not like I can fall back to like this is my base, this is my comfort zone. It's like no, there isn't like one nation that's like, oh yeah, she's ours. It's like everyone's kind of like, oh, she's kind of like a fake Belgian, kind of fake American, like. And so it's more like the more you learn about other cultures and other countries, the more like you get like accepted in, which is something I look for. It's nice to have community and to be accepted.
Yeah.
1,000%. I think we talk about this a lot, especially me. I think that's been a feeling that I've been seeking for, right? To feel like you're part of something, someone, or some group, but also to be understood. And I think that's something I've struggled with. And I'm just really curious because, of course, you've met Pablo and everything, and it's great. And you guys have so many commonalities. But in that process, have you ever said, well, how would you choose then what aspect of you to be kind of understood or seen or comprehended in that, especially in a life partner in that sense, right? Or was that not an issue for you? I guess
being in the relationship that I'm in has been very interesting over the years, and it's not like it's been that we always understand each other, even from a language perspective, because we don't share the same base and we don't share the same cultural bases. But I think so. One of the things that I was like attracted me to begin with was that he had also grown up moving, and so it was something that he could understand, even though both of his parents are from the same culture, and he spent some time in like he had lived in Argentina for many years, but he had also lived in Paraguay for a few years, lived in Switzerland for many years, so he understood that aspect of being uprooted. And also like in the likes of Switzerland, it's not that he went to like I don't know, like an Argentine school or something. Like, he went to a Swiss school, and so like that aspect of embracing another culture and not living like in an expat bubble. So I think that's something that is fundamental to me, and it's that I appreciated that he understood as well. On the flip side, there are things that I think that we have learned over the years to understand about the other, but it's, he does have that base, that core. And that's even if he chose to leave Argentina, like he still like pines to go back.
yeah, he's still very strong Argentine at heart.
And yeah, and like every Instagram or every meme he sends me is something related to, like, it's always in Spanish and it's something related, like more often than not related to Argentina.
He's trying to inception you. He's trying to inception you to go back to Argentina with him.
And I'm like, you've lived in the US for like 6 years now. Like, try to embrace the culture a little bit. But, and so it's like one of those things where it's like, I don't have that. So it's something that I think like sometimes we'll have misunderstandings in that sense just because.
I know that he definitely still has that heart in Argentina, but he has lived all across the world. He's worked and studied in different countries, and I think, maybe he doesn't have a background as, intense as you or Christina, but he still does understand a little bit of that international, like, global citizen living life. And I think that does bring, a must for you. Do you think that is something? Because that's what I'm hearing from you. That's something that kind of helps you understand each other a little bit.
I think actually something that was like, and it's one of those things that's like that I love about life is that you're always surprised. And like the problem, whenever you make an assumption, you're wrong. So I thought it's like, okay, so like he's left his country. Everything I've read and everything all the other Argentines talk about is that it's all like es un desastre. Like everything is like the end of the world in Argentina. It's like what they say. I'm like, it seems okay, but that's how they. But it just different people express themselves in different ways.
I think I would get along in Argentina for sure. I'm not gonna lie. I think everything's the end of the world. Christina, would you agree? I think I'm very dramatic.
And like it's just what these things are said. It was like I was like you guys seem a little confused because it's like you think it's like it's always like we're the best in the world and we have the best footballers and like dulce de leche is the best thing and we have the best pizza and then but it's like everything's a disaster, nothing works, and you're like, which is it? You seem very confused. But
So
I came in from the base. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, it's like you left your country for economic reasons and you're not talking about going back anytime soon because the prospects don't seem great, especially like when we first met, it was still like kirchnerismo. And so like the politics weren't looking fabulous. And that impacted the economy as well and job opportunities. So in that sense, I think I translated in my head of being like, okay, well, it was kind of like my dad left Zimbabwe because the opportunities, well, at the time there was a civil war and then he went to South Africa and there was apartheid. So then he left there and went to the UK. But so it was like, okay, you've left your country and my dad never moved back. And so it's something that is like, I know that like he missed it and it was sad, but at least in my lifetime, I haven't seen him like looking back that much. It's kind of like he left it, he loves it, he's gone back on holiday, but he's not flirting with the idea of going back. So that's kind of how I saw it because I was being told that it was the end of the world in Argentina. And then but then it's clearly not the case. I've learned over the last few years as we go many times a year. And then they're like, ooh, like maybe this new president will be the solution. And so you learn, it's like, I assumed I was like, okay, this is something I understand, the sadness of leaving your country. And now you will move on and be like a global nomad citizen. And then you're like, it remains unclear if that's what will happen or if we'll end up in Argentina. It's to be seen.
This is a perfect. This is actually like, one of the questions I wanted to ask Astrid, and I know we've talked about it on and off, but especially thinking ahead, and I know you guys definitely at some point will think about family and planning for a future family. Given your upbringing, being all over, and kind of the pros and cons of that, and the challenges and the positives that have come out of those experiences, how do you foresee that when you're thinking about your children? Would you want a similar experience, or would you say this was so exciting but a lot of work, adjusting to a new environment every few years, and I would rather they stay in one place? Like, how do you and Pablo maybe think about that in particular?
I've always thought of the idea of like settling down in one place to be really frightening. And because there's so much more that I want to see, as well as the fact as there isn't like one place that I feel is like completes me, shall we say? That there's a few places that I truly love and that it's like they're the closest to home that I'm going to have. But when you're there or when I'm there, I'm still missing something else. And my experiences to date have been that I can love something, but I'll still be missing something else. And so I like the idea of continuing to move because then you're not like permanently missing the one thing. It's like you might be missing different things at different times. And it gives you the opportunity to experience more the cultures and adventures. And like I definitely have some places that I would love to live in that I have not lived in yet. And I think that's something that Pablo and I have always been aligned on, that like even when we started dating, we both had lists of places that we wanted to live in, and they were all over the world. Um, Now, I don't know if we'll hit everywhere on those lists because you also need it to align professionally. But I'd like to think that we'll keep moving. And in terms of the impact on a family, I think all in all, it was a very positive experience for me. To be fair, it's all I know. Was I jealous of children who were born and raised in one place and have the same friends from forever? Yes, but at the same time, I also see people who are born and raised somewhere and don't maintain those friendships either. And that when you ask like, oh, are you going home? Are you going to see your friends when you go home? They're like they don't necessarily have any more friends there, or their friends have all left. So it's not that it's assured either way. I will say, so I like there's two caveats. It's like one, I would try to avoid, if we had hypothetical children, I would try to avoid moving during adolescence because I do think that's very difficult. And we did two moves in when I was in middle school, and I think that's a particularly awkward time. That was very unpleasant. So I would try to avoid that. Yeah, I can tell you, like in the first week of school in Hong Kong, like I fell down the stairs as well as walked into a glass wall. And when you don't have friends yet, that does not help.
That is so.
Yeah, it's like I got contact lenses like a week after because we discovered that like my eyesight wasn't doing too great, but it doesn't help to make friends.
Oh my gosh,
Especially when you're 12. It's like it's terrible. Yeah, no. So I think that would be one to take into consideration. I think it also depends on like how your children are taking it. Um, so like I thought it was a positive experience all in all. I can tell you, I think my sister has been very vocal in that she would not want to do that to like her children, and she found it very difficult. And my brother hasn't been that vocal about it, but he's also been living in one place for the past 16 years now and like has not expressed any interest in leaving. So that might be their way of saying like we're putting down roots. Um, which I do find very interesting because of essence, I'm not going to say it's the same experience because you move at different ages. Our formative years weren't necessarily the same places. So this is something like my brother and I have discussed before when I felt a lot more attached to London and he felt a lot more attached to New York, and he was asking me like why do you feel that way? I don't understand. Even like, the likes of you have the passport, which he did not. Um and and I was like, well, essentially from 9 until 18, with the exception of the year in Hong Kong, I was in London. And it's like, those are really formative years. And for him, like, his, like, important years had been in New York. And so it's interesting, it's like, even though you'd be like, oh, we all had the same experience, it's like, well, clearly not.
Yeah,
fair enough.
I have a quick questions about that because I actually want to discuss this a little bit more about siblings and the order in which your sister. First question is like what order was your siblings, and then how what's the age difference? Because the one thing that I really latched onto here was the fact that I have two older sisters. One of them is 18 months older and the other one's 5 years older. And I can definitely say that my sister that was 5 years older, she was older when she moved to Hong Kong. I was 4, she was 9. But me and my second sister definitely have more ties to Hong Kong, and I definitely integrated, I think the most out of all three of us in terms of like my accent being super hodgepodge as well, and just living the, I don't know, the local expat life there, the third culture life there. So I want to know about your situation with your siblings and how that because the two of them are more quote unquote settled in one place, and you are still moving around. Is that a youngest child thing? I don't know. Let's figure this one out. I want to know this one.
Sure. So my brother is 4.5 years older. And but he also skipped a year. So he left home when I was 13. And my sister is 2 years older. And then in terms of, I will say, my sister yearns to put down roots, but she's still moving. She's the one who's the most recently moved. And that's because of, so, I mean, her profession. So she's been in medical school and then residency and now doing fellowship. And those have led to different locations, which they didn't have to, because you could actively just recruit in one geography, but they made the decisions to go to the different places. So I was like, she just has been desperate to put down roots her entire life and still hasn't made it. Versus I've accepted, I'm like, it's not going to happen. And I do think also, having spoken even to I know some of other cousins who moved far away and who, that I think being a younger sibling definitely can impact or influence your moves, in the sense of your siblings have already done everything. Well, a lot of that there is ready to be done. So even my brother was the super mathy one and was outstanding at academics, and my sister was the artistic one, which is ironic because she was still also great at academics, but she got labeled by my parents the artistic one. And then so you're left with okay, well, the sciences and the arts are gone, so what you're
What am
can
I
I be good
left
at
with?
anything? And I think that honestly, I think one of the reasons, there was a lot of reasons I wanted to go, I wanted to go to the Peace Corps. It's I wanted to feel that what I was doing professionally was having a positive impact. I wanted to go into a less structured environment because a lot of my academic as well as internship experiences have been very structured. And I wanted to see, how do I operate without structure, and will I, sink or swim? And I, in the application at the time, you couldn't choose the country. And I knew I wanted sub-Saharan Africa because I wanted to actually, honestly, kind of better understand my father and get more links with his continent. And I knew that they would send me there regardless, because the minute you speak a word of French, they send you to Africa. But also, it's I liked the idea of Madagascar was something new and different that none of them knew anything about, and but that was also very far, and I couldn't be let's go with the internet service or whatever, was infrastructure is not amazing there, at least when I was there, and that is I couldn't be compared anymore. So I was living in my little hut without electricity or running water, and I wouldn't feel the comparison to my siblings. And so it's and I had a fantastic time professionally and personally. But I think it was a good opportunity for me to just kind of get on my own 2 feet without not being the mathy one or the artistic one.
That's nice, for identity-wise, just as an individual rather than an international individual. I think that's great. I'm very happy for you for that. Yeah. Well, I guess I'm projecting also because I have that similar experience as being the youngest. And I got labeled into being the artistic one, but I'm okay with that.
I mean, it's you got labeled. I think they were just confused with me. They're there's nothing left. And then the French, in the French academic system, there's you can do there are 3 specialties. You can do science, literature, or at the time, I think they've Macron reformed the education system. But there was there was science, literature, and econ. And with like my brother had done the sciences, my sister had done literature, and I didn't want to do econ at the time. Um, and well, also because like the econ people were labeled as the lazy people, and I was like, well, I can't go down that route. Um, so then I was like, okay, well, whatever I do, I'm just following what the others have done. So this doesn't help. But all in all, I very much enjoyed my life so far.
I don't think that you need to slow down or like not move anywhere, but I'm wondering because if you have that yearning to like stay put for a little bit, like do you have family nearby or are they like just a hopscotch away? Like you said your brother's in America, maybe you'll be living in South America. That's at least the same time zone ish, right? As opposed to like you living in Asia, that'd be the opposite side of the or Australia, America to Australia. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the community that you're trying to are you trying to build yourself a community around the world or you have a network to quickly I don't know, latch the reason why I don't want to move back to the States is because I mean the closest family I have is in the Midwest and I would be moving to the West Coast and that's honestly one of the biggest reasons why I didn't want to move back. They're like 6 hours away, far.
No, that makes sense. No, I think it is very complicated in that we're in New York. My brother has been in New York for the past 16 years, something around there. Since he was 21. I have grown to appreciate New York, but it's a place that I've long found a little overwhelming. And I'm someone who resonates more with nature. And so, whether it be a rural place or a smaller city with easy access to nature, I find that that is what brings me the most like joy from let's go with like balance of like your environment. The community aspect is complicated then. So, my brother is in New York, and now because my sister was looking to be closer to her family, or like she was in California and has now moved to New York. But I was desperately trying to leave New York for the past few years. And now I'm like, she's here. All three of us are in the same place. And when she moved, it was the first time in 19 years that we'd been in the same city. So I couldn't leave. But it was the timing is terrible because it's even. I was waiting for Pablo to feel ready to leave New York. And just as it's like, okay, I've had my time. My sister announces, we're moving to New York. And I'm like, well, we can't go now. So it's this complicated. So like we are staying here now for a while. Now, to add to this, my sister and brother-in-law are here for like the next 2 years. They've been here for a year now, for 2 years, and then realistically, they will probably move. New York isn't their cup of tea either. And they loved California. So they'll move back to California. Probably. We'll see. Which is very conflicting because one, California is 6 hours away. Depending on like LA to New York is like 6 hours. The last time I went to San Francisco, it was longer, which I was like, I didn't remember it being so far away, but it is. And my dream for the next step has been going back to like continental Europe. I'm not saying it's forever, but I was like, I had a fabulous time in Switzerland. I really like let's go with the European corporate values. I think that they treat people in a lot more humane manner. And so it's something that I would love to experience again.
Yeah.
But then with my sister keeps trying to convince me to move to California, and I'm like, I'm thinking like next steps is Europe, and you're thinking the opposite. Well, there we go. So back to like you're thinking opposite side of the planet, and like it's a thing that it's a topic that has many. Let's go with it's a tense topic because we want to be in the same place. And and we haven't quite figured it out. And I am fearful of the day that one of us decides to go. Realistically, it's going to be my sister or I, because my brother will probably live the rest of his life in New York. Um, but no, it is a fear-inducing topic. But at the same time, you have to also, at least I feel like I also have to live my life, and like our like my husband's and my life, and that if we want to move to Sao Paulo or Switzerland, or the dream is Cape Town, frankly, for me. But it's like,
Even farther
it's
away.
like that's really truly, I'd be willing to put down roots in Cape Town, but like professionally there, like the options are limited. Um, but but that so it's it isn't figured out, no.
I gotta ask, where are your parents in all of this?
So they are in rural New Mexico.
Oh,
That so when I left university, because I was the youngest, so they were still in London, and my dad was kind of fed up with the gray, and we had been going to New Mexico my entire life, to ski actually. Um, my parents discovered it when I was one, and we just kept going back, and they had bought a plot of land and decided to move there.
how interesting. Neither of them are American.
The Belgium and the Zimbabwean discover New Mexico.
Well, the thing is, though, my dad commented at the time that New Mexico was the closest that he could find to Zimbabwe in like the West. It's like high plateau, big blue skies, like laws are flexible, in that it's kind of still the Wild West. And I think and actually it has the highest like rate, like I think it's like the volume of returned Peace Corps volunteers is like highest in like the state of New Mexico, because it's just like it's a little more like off the beaten track, which is part of its charm. I mean, I have to say, I do think like New Mexico is a hidden gem. It's like most people have not thought of it, heard of it. They live at the base of the Rocky Mountains. So my dad likes to ski throughout the entire winter. And culturally, it's a really, culturally actually, and so I think this is part of probably why we love it. Um, it's a very interesting place because, like in particular, like in northern New Mexico where they live, there's many different cultures. So there's the like the the Native American population has been there for more than 1,000 years. I think the Taos Pueblo is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's like the longest inhabited Native American like site in the U.S. There's also um, like the Hispanic population of like people who came over hundreds of years ago, which is considered different to the Latino population. And then there's also the Anglos. Um, and it just so happened that like the thing that like they fell in love with to begin with was there was a little French population there as well. Um, and so I think they like really appreciated. And similar, it's like I think it's something that I love. It's like things are all bilingual there. It's like everything's kind of like Spanglish. The roads are like half of them are in Spanish, half are in English. Um, and there's just a lot of different cultures going on, and it's stunning. The light is fantastic. A lot of artists go there. There's a good music scene. I should work for the New Mexico Board
You
of Tourism. I do love that.
should.
There's like international music goes through all the time. Like we've seen Malian singers, like English singers. Like I saw Mumford and Sons there, as well as Alabama Shakes, and then we went to the Abbott Brothers recently. But then like like Malian bands come through as well as like Cuban bands. So like there's a good music scene. Georgia O'Keeffe also.
Wow.
I do want to say, like, a couple of years ago, so it was like literally only 2 years ago, I was thinking about moving back to the States, and New Mexico was surprisingly on the list, and I was thinking, would I be crazy to move to New Mexico? And you just solved the answer for me. The answer is no. I think I would enjoy it. I think I'd love it. All right.
I think it's a wonderful place. Um, I would definitely, it's one of those things where I would definitely consider living there at some point. I think my parents are more like, there are no jobs here, don't come here. But like, it's all relative. It depends what you do. You know, you could work for the ski resort, you could be an artist, you could run in it, like, you could just work remotely. Like, there's a lot of things.
Yes. Yes.
So we're all moving to New Mexico, is what
That's what it
I.
sounds like. But Astrid, how do they feel you thinking about moving to Cape Town or like Switzerland or like, do they feel like it's too far?
I think it's one of those, it causes anxiety when I talk about leaving because they're like, why would you leave us? But at the same time, like, it's not that you live in New York either. So, and it's very complicated to get to Taos. So it's not that, I mean, it's faster to get to Madrid than to like Taos. It's not that, it's the most accessible. Yeah. So I definitely think there's something spoken anxiety, but at the same time, I think that they would understand and they it's something that I've discussed a little with my mother in the past, and it's like, and she gets it, and she's the only one of her siblings to have left Belgium. She's one of five. Her four siblings married Belgians and stayed in Belgium. And she was the only one to leave and move to Hong Kong in the 80s with her Zimbabwean husband. At the time when like phone calls were very expensive, and I don't think her mother loved that. Honestly, I think my dad would secretly be very happy if we moved to Cape Town because it would be his excuse to go more often. And his some of his closest friends are still there. That I think if we found good jobs, he would be delighted. I think unemployment is quite high currently in Cape Town, so it would be complicated. Um, but um, but also I think Franschhoek, the entire wine region would be delightful to live in. Um,
Yeah. Wine and South
we could
African wine's really
you guys
good.
want to open a vineyard together?
Let's do it, Astrid. You know I love wine. So with that said, Astrid, I think I just find it really curious, right, that your family are not from the U.S., but it sounds like everyone has gathered and made a home in the U.S., or at least, I mean, at this point, all your nuclear family is there. So is that where you feel most at home, quote unquote? I know we've just mentioned, or you mentioned earlier, that you don't feel like any one place completes you wholly, but maybe at this point, where do you feel most at home?
How do we define feeling at home?
Where you feel like most yourself, perhaps?
Most open to be yourself.
Yeah. Your most genuine self.
As in, you don't have to keep telling people you're from Belgium and only Belgium.
No, you say that, but I meet new Argentines all the time, and I just go with Belgium. The Argentine community in New York just keeps growing, and so and then others will introduce me as Belgian, and then one will be like, "Oh, we just went," and they'll be like, "Oh, I lived there for a bit." I'm like, "Oh no, I haven't actually lived there."
I actually don't know what you're talking about.
I'm like, well, at least I know Belgium well. Like we grew up, like we would go every month when we were living in London. I'd spent like a lot of my summers and other holidays, so at least I can speak to it. But if they're like, "Oh, when did you live there?" or "Where did you live?" I'm like, so change the topic. I think New York is. There's a lot of my friends are here, but I have friends in a lot of places in the world, including Taiwan, Hong Kong. One of my childhood best friends just moved to Melbourne, so like there's another option. No, so I I think I've reached the point where I am comfortable enough with myself that there isn't like a place that's going to fill that in. And maybe I'll feel differently one day. Um, but I think in the past I've said it's like often felt like home is wherever I'm living. So, even when I was in Madagascar and people were like, "Oh, like it's like where do you live? Where are you from?" And I was like, "Well, I live in Matara," and they're like, "Well, what?" And they're like, "Yeah, no, well, that's where I've been for the last like year plus. That's where my home is." But yeah, I don't know if I'll ever. Yeah, I don't think it helps that New York, as said, New York is lovely, but it's a lot. Um, so maybe if it was a better fit of a location, I might feel differently. Um, but then it's like let's you can either hopefully there's already a community there that you know if it's another place, or you build a new community. I can tell you like when when I did my internship in Switzerland, um, I had been gung ho of going to Switzerland and checking it out, and I was very excited about the job opportunity. But then I get there and I realize like I don't really know anyone, and Pablo's childhood friends are very busy, and the Swiss plan well in advance, and often tend to spend more time with like their childhood friends, which makes sense. Like a lot of people aren't particularly interested in investing in people who are passing through. Um, and and this was like at the beginning was really hard because notably notably because I was like Switzerland is so beautiful and it was the summer and everyone was out at the lake and grilling and hanging out and being social, and I was like it's so beautiful and it's so sad not to share it. So then I became very gung-ho at like finding a community, and I think I found it in two different sources. One was I joined a running club, and there was like many like actually like there's this wonderful French woman who like adopted me, and she was like, yeah, I know it's hard when you move here, and like introduced me to a lot of her friends. And then we would go and like whether it be like running, but like just not like we actually became friends and would hang out and river raft and go to music festivals. And so I think that was delightful having that community. And then I made friends with some Swiss people through rock climbing. That is like if there was a thing for us to do together, they would accept me. And and so it's like so that's the thing. It's like I found by the time I was leaving, I was like, I have a community here. It's like I like even though it was only a summer, I felt that like I had built a nice life for myself. And that gives me confidence that if we were to move, is it difficult at the beginning? Of course, but I have a lot of prior experience that proves to me that it's possible to create new communities.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah.
That's so true. Well, thank you, Astrid. So the last section I wanted to just cover as we wrap up is like rapid questions. I'll shoot you some questions and would love to know what your quick answers are. Sounds good?
Okay, sounds good.
So, what language do you think in, and what, and on top of that, like what language do you feel you're most genuine in?
I would say it depends. I'm sorry. On the environment that I've been in. No, it's like, but it depends on the environment I've been in the most, like recently. So currently, I'd say like probably English. Like I work in English. A lot of people I see here are in English. However, I can tell you that I sometimes talk in my sleep, and Pablo has told me it's like, oh yeah, you were just chatting to me in Spanish, but you were clearly unconscious. So that is like, um, and then in terms of most genuine, I mean, I think it's similar. It's like whatever I've been the most in. But I think at this point, between English, French, and Spanish, like I'm comfortable in everything a sufficient amount that I can still be snarky or like honest or whatever it may be in any of these languages. I note the snarkiness because I feel like humor is sometimes, or that aspect of oneself is sometimes harder to put into another language. But I think I've covered it in all three.
Okay, so that was actually my next question. Which language you're funniest in? Do you think which one are you the funniest in of the three, though?
If I had to guess, I'd say probably English, but also because I just have more exposure to English comedians. I just think a lot of the humor, whether it be that I ingest, is like in English. However, there are many fabulous French comedians. I just have less of my life is in French currently. Um, and so, but if I moved to Switzerland, I might be funnier in French.
And then when you're mad, what language are you in? when you're angry? What's your cuss word? What language you cuss in?
That's true, because when you're angry, it free flows. Yeah.
Well, it used to be in French, which would upset my mother because she would see like we might be speaking like with like my siblings, we might be speaking like franglais or whatever, and then we would get angry and then switch to French. She was like, "What is this? Like, why do you associate French with it?" And you're like, "It's a great language to be angry in." Um, and maybe maybe more of the disciplining was done in French. I don't know. The problem is now, like, the person who I'm most likely to be angry with is my husband, just because we spend a lot of time together, and that it's just exposure. You're like, he's there, and and it's very much a mix because we speak to each other in a mix. We actually started in French, like our relationship, and then both asked to have more of the other language. Like he wanted more English because like we live in the US and his work is now in English, and I wanted more Spanish because most of his friends as well as like his family just speak Spanish. So we've like actively asked the other like, can we switch to these languages? So now it's like if I'm angry, it's most likely to be in Spanglish.
I love it.
There are great swear words in Spanish.
There
though,
are
as well.
great swear words, and then a lot of emotion also.
I will say French is the best, but Spanish and Argentine Spanish particularly has wonderful cuss words.
I love it. I love it. Well, I think that's actually all the questions I have from my end. I don't know, Danik, do you have anything to wrap up?
It's all the questions I have too. It was a pleasure getting to know you, Astrid.
Thank you so much for your time. This was super fun and learned so much.
No, well, pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, Astrid.
We'll talk to you soon.
All right.
We're
gonna let you go.
Thank you,
Bye.
Astrid.
Bye, Astrid.
Bye. All right. Well, that was a very interesting conversation as well.
Yes, it was. I have a lot of like small things to add there. I want to know a bit more about because I realize now I'm wondering what makes like the family or the children of the family kind of gear towards one culture or the other. So if their parents are too different, right? So hers is, mother's side, so Belgian, right? And I think that her and her siblings would associate more with like being Belgian and speaking French and all that. And for me, it's a lot of it was American. Like a lot of my outward personality is American. And I'm
Which
wondering,
is very interesting.
Yeah,
because I think
follow the mother.
Yeah, exactly. Usually you follow the mother.
I will actually say I know that I might dress and I might seem more American, but I've always believed that I have a lot of the like, rules and categories in my head do feel quite Asian. It's a very odd thing, and we can discuss it more. And I want to discuss it down the line a bit more. This topic, I think it's very interesting. I think
there's something to it. I think a lot of, you're right, like the reasoning, the principles, and a lot of things underneath do maybe come from more the mother. I also am curious, something we didn't ask Astrid, but maybe the person whose personality is strongest in the family, between the husband and the wife, or the mother and the father, get more, because I think something Astrid mentioned a few times was exposure. Yeah. And I think exposure can come from spending more time physically in that place, or like the personalities, the education, and all of that. So maybe that's also one of the influences. Yeah, something to think about that I want to take in another episode, I think. But yes. Is there any other thoughts that you have on that interview? I thought it was just something I learned personally about Astrid is I didn't realize that a lot of her decisions to go to such extreme places, such as living in Madagascar, and it's not like, the main cities, but like rural places, or going to like Bolivia and all these like small towns and everything, was because she wanted to also separate herself from her siblings, have something that's her own. And I thought that was something that I just didn't even think about, which was very curious to learn about. Yeah. Anyways, these are different things that we can like discuss in more podcasts, and I'm interested to know more about this. But let's wrap up this episode. Yeah, so I think we definitely had many takeaways, from like having this like exposure, siblings, and like family, how that can impact one's identity. But I think something I took away that I also felt like reinforced my stance about this like feeling, of like being so unrooted or unsettled, which I know sometimes you don't feel as much as I do. I think you can see from Astrid that that's like something that some of us do, struggle with at times.
Yeah, I do understand that now. I definitely
with
do.
more clarity.
With more clarity after meeting Astrid and you, and I can't wait to meet more of your friends. I mean, it's been a very eye-opening experience, but so, which is great. But thank you so much, everyone, for spending the time with us today. I hope you had a good experience getting to know us, getting to know Astrid, and hopefully that gave you some more, I don't know, ideas of sorts, or what word am I looking for, Christina?
Or be inspired to,
Yes.
to take in these like passerbys who are transient and not, not focus in a route, but are not rooted as much as many people, as Astrid mentioned. Well, thank you all for listening. Let's keep getting to know each other.
That's correct. We are neither here nor there. Conversations across. I guess today's Astrid. Please follow us on all the different social medias, which I have in the links below. And we'll see you next time.